A single drop of sweat forms on skin. It sits there for a moment, catching light that shouldn't exist in the dark. Then it falls. Nothing else moves. No creature calls out. No leaves shift. Just this, a body quietly leaking water into dry air for no reason anyone in that moment could explain. This happens on your body over 600 times a day. You don't notice it. You've never had to. But somewhere on this planet, roughly 2 million years ago, this same event was not ordinary. It was not background noise. It was a strange and radical experiment being run in real time on a creature that had no idea it was making a bet against every other mammal on Earth. Almost every land mammal alive today is covered in hair. Bears, wolves, lions, horses, mice, elephants mostly. Whales, descended from land mammals, still carry traces of it before birth. And then there's one branch of the primate family that simply stopped. Naked, exposed, sweating. Most people assume this happened because we needed to, because clothes and fire and shelter made fur pointless, an evolutionary leftover we didn't need anymore. That is not what the evidence suggests. The truth is stranger, older, and considerably more dangerous than that. Ask most people why humans are hairless, and you'll get some version of the same answer. We invented clothing, so we didn't need fur anymore. It sounds reasonable. It fits the story we like to tell about ourselves, that human intelligence solved the problem, and biology simply followed our lead. There's only one issue with that explanation. Genetic evidence indicates the loss of body hair occurred somewhere between 1 and 3 million years ago. Clothing, the earliest confirmed evidence of it, didn't appear until roughly 170,000 years ago, hundreds of thousands of years later, deduced not from cloth itself, which rots and vanishes, but from something else entirely. The DNA of body lice, a parasite that could only have adapted to live in garments once garments existed to live in. Which means for over 1 million years, hairless human ancestors walked the earth with no fur and no clothes. No insulation from cold nights. No barrier against the sun. No protection from insect bites, thorns, scrapes, ultraviolet radiation. Naked, in the open, defenseless. And this lasted for longer than the entire existence of Homo sapiens as a species. So the timeline doesn't just weaken the clothing theory. It obliterates it. Something else forced this. Something happened before we could protect ourselves from the consequences of losing our fur, which means whatever caused it must have been worth an almost unthinkable risk. To understand why, you have to go back to a specific kind of violence. Not the violence of a fight, but the violence of exhaustion. Roughly 2 million years ago, the forests that had sheltered our ancestors for millions of years were shrinking. Climate shift across East Africa were converting dense woodland into open grassland, savanna. Trees became sparse. Shade became rare. And an upright, bipedal primate, already walking on 2 legs for several million years, now found itself standing in the full, direct violence of equatorial sun with nowhere to hide. Every other predator on that plain solved the heat problem the same way. Rest during the day, hunt at dawn, dusk, or night, when the temperature dropped and the sun's assault eased. Lions sleep through the hottest hours. Cheetahs hunt at dawn. Even prey animals like antelope graze early and late, avoiding the furnace of midday. There is a narrow window, then the hours when the African sun was at its most punishing, when almost nothing on the savanna wanted to move. And that is precisely the window early humans appear to have exploited. This is the theory known as persistence hunting. Not chasing prey to catch it in a sprint. Humans are embarrassingly slow compared to almost every other savanna mammal, but tracking it relentlessly for hours through the hottest part of the day until the animal's own body betrayed it. A kudu or an eland can outrun a human easily in a straight sprint. But these animals cool themselves primarily by panting, and running are, for a 4-legged animal, mechanically incompatible. You cannot do both efficiently at once. Eventually, the animal's core temperature climbs past what its brain can survive, and it collapses. Not because the human was faster, because the human never stopped. This strategy is not theoretical. It has been observed and documented among modern hunter-gatherers, chasing animals across brutal heat for 5, 6, sometimes 8 hours on foot until the prey simply gives out. But this method only works if the hunter can survive the same heat that is killing the prey. And that is the pressure that appears to explain almost everything about the human body. The long legs built for endurance rather than speed, the upright posture that reduces the surface area exposed to direct overhead sun, the astonishing human capacity to sweat up to 3 liters an hour under extreme exertion, more than almost any other mammal on Earth. And the fur. The fur had to go, because thick hair, magnificent at trapping warmth in the cold, becomes a liability the moment your survival depends on releasing heat, not keeping it. A coat that insulates is a coat that suffocates a body trying to cool itself through sweat evaporating off skin. So losing fur wasn't a step backward. It wasn't a vulnerability we later patched with clothing. It was very possibly the single adaptation that let a slow, weak, physically unremarkable primate outlast the fastest animals on the continent. Not through power, but through refusing to stop. But here is where the story stops being triumphant and starts becoming unsettling. Every adaptation is a trade. Nothing in evolution is free. Bare skin exposed to direct sun is bare skin exposed to radiation damage. And the data shows the body's answer to this was not to grow the fur back, but to darken. Researchers studying skin pigmentation genetics have traced the evolution of dark skin to almost precisely the same window as the loss of hair, suggesting the two were not separate developments, but a single, continuous emergency response. Strip the insulation for heat control, then armor the exposed surface with melanin to prevent the sun from destroying the very glands doing the cooling. This means the skin tone of early humans was not a cosmetic detail. It was survival equipment, engineered by the same crisis that made us hairless in the first place. And every later variation in human skin color across the globe traces back, at its root, to populations migrating away from that original equatorial pressure and adjusting, again, generation by generation, to how much sun their new environments actually demanded protection from. Consider what that means. The visible differences in human skin color that have, for so much of history, been twisted into justifications for hierarchy and cruelty. They are, at their biological origin, nothing more than the residue of a body's desperate negotiation with the sun millions of years ago, in service of a hunting strategy built entirely on the ability to survive heat that would kill almost anything else alive. A trait born from endurance was, later, weaponized into division. There's something almost unbearable in that irony. The persistence hunting theory is compelling. It is not, however, uncontested. Some researchers argue that parasites, not heat, were the dominant pressure. That dense fur on a social, close-contact primate becomes an ideal breeding ground for ticks, lice, and disease-carrying insects. And that losing hair may have been, in part, a defense against infection and infestation rather than a defense against overheating. Others point to a slower, less dramatic possibility, that as human ancestors relied more and more on cooperative behavior, tool use, and social bonding rather than raw physical dominance, the sexual and social signaling function of skin, visible, expressive, capable of blushing, flushing, revealing emotion in a way fur never could, became its own quiet advantage, favored not by predators or prey, but by other humans choosing who to trust, who to bond with, who to select as a mate. The honest answer is that no single theory fully explains it. The data cannot fully resolve which pressure came first or whether they arrived together, reinforcing each other in ways a fossil record, which does not preserve skin or hair, can never definitively confirm. What the evidence does confirm is this. Something extraordinary was happening to an already strange, upright, two-legged primate on an increasingly hostile plane, and the body's response was not caution. It was radical exposure, a bet placed against nearly every other mammal strategy for survival. Step back further, and a stranger truth begins to surface. Humans are, in evolutionary terms, defined less by what they gained than by what they were willing to lose. We lost the fur that regulated temperature. We lost the powerful jaw muscles that once anchored to a heavier skull, freeing space for a larger brain to grow. We lost the raw physical strength of our primate cousins. A chimpanzee, pound for pound, can overpower a human with disturbing ease. We lost claws. We lost speed. We lost natural weapons of almost every kind. At nearly every stage, the species considered successful by evolution's blind, indifferent math was the one that had stripped itself of the very tools evolution normally rewards. And in the space left behind by all of that loss, something else expanded. Endurance, cooperation, tool use, language, long-term memory, planning, sweat glands, and social bonds where other animals had fangs and fur. It raises an uncomfortable question, one the fossil record cannot answer, but the pattern cannot avoid implying, that the story of human evolution may not be a story of steady accumulation at all. It may be a story of strategic surrender, of a species that repeatedly bet its survival not on being stronger, faster, or better armored than everything around it, but on being willing to give up the very things that made other animals safe. We call this progress now, looking backward because we won. But at the time, 2 million years ago, alone, hairless, and exposed on a scorching plain, with no way of knowing whether the bet would pay off, it would have looked, to any impartial observer, indistinguishable from a slow-motion act of self-destruction. You are, at this exact moment, running the same experiment your ancestors began 2 million years ago. Your body is still built for a hunt that hasn't happened in generations. Still able to sweat away 3 liters of water an hour in service of a chase you will likely never run. Still carrying skin that remembers, in its pigment, a sun-scorched plain most of your ancestors left behind tens of thousands of years ago. You inherited a body optimized for exposure, for vulnerability made into a weapon. And somewhere in that fact is a quiet, unresolved discomfort that the very things which feel like weaknesses, the softness, the fragility, the absence of natural armor, may be in the colder logic of survival, exactly the opposite. Every other creature on that ancient plain was covered, armed, insulated, protected. We were the ones who walked out into the heat with nothing. And somehow, we are the ones still walking.